Mr. Schoechle, please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate? You understand you're under oath. You may be seated.
Would you state your full name for the record, please?
Timothy D. Schoechle.
Okay. And you filed rebuttal testimony and supplemental rebuttal testimony in this docket, correct?
That's correct.
And is your testimony that you filed, including the exhibits, true and correct as we are here today?
Yes.
Okay. You're a witness.
Mr. Greifeldinger.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Schoechle, do you have any formal training in medical research?
No.
Do you have any formal training in toxicology?
No.
And you do not have a medical degree, correct?
That's correct.
In your testimony at page 7, lines 9 through 15, you generally talk about what you ultimately refer to as AMI 2.0. Do you see that?
Yes.
As I understand what you're talking about here is you're talking about a metering system that would provide two-way communication between the utility and the customer to better manage the grid and operations. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's an informal term that I coined. It's not used by anybody else. I just was involved in the development of early AMI myself, and I think it's moved on far from the present products that call themselves AMI. The technology's gone a long way and going fast right now.
Great. And you see it as providing, as it continues to evolve, the ability to for the utility to receive more information and information to go both ways, correct?
For it to go both ways, as far as more information, what's really needed is information flowing from the utility to the premises, and premises control systems that can use that energy to manage the energy on premises, including solar and storage, as other. And instead of uploading metering data to a utility that can't use it effectively.
Okay. But that would that require the utility to have information about the operations of the solar and storage, as you just referred to it?
No. The information, the metering information is really needed on the premises for managing energy on the premises. That was the original concept behind the development of AMI before it got converted into a radio network.
Now, you suggest that the utility should utilize fiber. Is that a fair statement?
I'm suggesting that everybody should have fiber, and the utilities could use it also. And some places are doing that already.
You referred on page 13 of your testimony. I want to get you to the specific line so you can reference it. It's actually at the very top of page 14. The sentence starts at the line 21 of page 13 and moves on to page 14. You refer to high-speed, non-shared media. Do you recall that?
Right. That's fiber.
Are you aware that the FlexNet system that IPL is installing has a licensed spectrum?
Yes. But it's still using a shared medium. Radio.
Have you studied the geography and layout of IPL's service territory?
No, I have not.
Have you done any analyses to understand the costs of installing fiber to every home?
Generally, I have a little understanding of that. Yes, I know that it's being done. It's being done all over the world, really.
Have you done any studies of the cost to implement that within IPL's service territory?
I haven't done anything specific to IPL's service territory. I'm familiar with my own area in Colorado and New Mexico and some parts of California, different places where this has been done. Cities like Chattanooga, Longmont.
A city could have a very different cost profile than a rural area. Is that fair?
It's fair to say that, but keep in mind we already went through we electrified rural America many years ago at a reasonable cost.
On page 16 of your testimony, lines 1 through 7, you talk about the security of the FlexNet system. And it's confidential, and I can keep this question public, which is why I'm not asking to move into confidential session. My question is, have you conducted your individualized review of the security of the FlexNet system?
I haven't studied it specific to FlexNet. I'm very familiar with security. I design courses for universities in cybersecurity. I participate with NIST in cybersecurity, preparation of standards for cybersecurity. So I'm pretty familiar with the general topic. I've not studied the FlexNet system, but I think the vulnerabilities are more. There's certainly flexibilities. There are certain vulnerabilities in any radio system, and it's possible to hack them. And the encryption capabilities of things like meters are very low because the cost of the meter is very low, and it won't support sophisticated encryption. But the real vulnerability is not there. It's at the head end. It's in the data storage. And if you read, like in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times last week, you can see what happened to Marriott. You can see it every day. Something like that is happening. And we've had quite a few incidents just last year. I think as part of my rebuttal, my supplemental testimony, I submitted an article on what happened to PG&E and their database and how that got hacked.
A moment ago, we were talking about AMI, what you called AMI 2.0. Is that system subject to potential hacking also?
Well, any system is subject to hacking, but a concept that I envision, which I've written in some of the documents that I work on, I'm working on international standards for home electronic systems, home and building control systems right now, that for managed specifically for in part for managing energy and solar and storage. We're taking great care to design those systems with cybersecurity and privacy, customer privacy in mind. And that's an important concept, the idea of privacy by design. You have to build it in from the beginning. So I think that it can be done. It can be made more secure. And if you keep in mind that the data, the metering data really is needed on the premises for real-time control, that's where the control of energy takes place. It doesn't take place in the grid or in the utility. It takes place on the premises and uses signals from the utility to do that. So I think
But the utility system needs to be able to communicate with it to provide those signals, correct?
yes,
And to react to what the system at the premise is also doing, correct?
right.
If you could turn to page 17, lines 16 through 17. And actually, I'm going to direct your testimony down to line 19 through 21. Could you read that sentence starting with, "I understand"?
I understand IPL may deny this. Deny what?
Well, you could, if it helps, you could read starting at line 16 through 21.
Okay. In contrast, AMI smart meters emit RF radiation continuously and or regularly in their networks, are pervasive sources of radiation, are not optional, are inescapable by all inhabitants of entire communities, and are imposed by public policymakers. I understand that IPL may deny this is the case with the FlexNet AMI system, but the measurements reported in the rebuttal testimony, Ms. Matara and Mr. Stetzer show otherwise.
You understand that Mr. Stetzer is not testified in this case?
I understand there was something about it I heard a few minutes ago, but I wasn't aware of anything to do with Mr. Stetzer, other than that they testified to the there was testimony to the effect that there were measurements.
And you understand that there are questions about the quality of the measurements that Ms. Matera undertook, correct?
That's what I just heard. I mean, I heard something like that a few minutes ago, but I'm not sure what the details of that were.
Do you believe it's fair to charge customers who want to opt out of an AMI meter a reasonable fee?
I think the AMI meter is more expensive than the analog system. I think that's the whole basic purpose of the AMI system, is to cram the rate base.
My question,
it doesn't help in managing energy.
My question is, do you believe it is fair to charge customers who opt out of the AMI system to a reasonable fee?
Say again?
For customers who elect the non-standard metering alternative, is it reasonable to charge them a fee, a reasonable fee?
I think that everybody should pay a fair fee, regardless of what kind of metering they have. The problem with the imposing an AMI system on your neighbors is even if you have an opt-out yourself, you're still going to be receiving radiation from everybody else around you. And I think it's certainly reasonable to charge people whatever the reasonable cost is, but there has to be a cost analysis, a cost-benefit analysis performed, which is missing in this whole case.
Do you understand that the costs of the AMI system will be addressed in a future rate case and not in this docket?
I think it needs to be. It needs to be done as quickly as possible, and I think there should be a moratorium before it's done.
Your Honor, I would like to provide the witness an exhibit. I have previously provided it to the consumer advocate and Mr. Marcus. We've marked it as IPL Hearing Exhibit 219.
I need some water. Could I get a bottle of water?
Hold on.
Mr. Graveldinger, Mr. over here. You gave me several, and so I don't know which one this number is.
I apologize. We've gotten the numbering now. It's the 1 Montana 13th Judicial District on the front.
Just a moment while the board receives the. Mr. Graveldinger, I apologize. Mr. Schoechle, what did you say?
I'm sorry, I had been given multiple exhibits, and he gave an exhibit number. None of mine were marked, so.
So do you have it?
I do have it now, yes.
Mr. Marcus, do you have a copy?
I do. I just got it.
Sorry. You may
Of course.
proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Schoechle, can you please, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Can you please generally describe what this document is?
It appears to be testimony that I submitted to litigation in Montana on behalf of a plaintiff in a case with the Yellowstone utility.
And this case addressed topics related to a smart meter manufactured by Landis and Gear. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And when did you submit this testimony or affidavit?
Well, let's see. This was, it says here, early this year, April 13th, 2008, it says.
I want to turn your attention to the bottom of page 4. It's paragraph 11. Could you read the last full sentence on that paragraph, on that page, which starts with due to?
Okay, due to the inherent risk, YVEC customers should be able to opt out from smart meter use for a reasonable fee or at no charge.
And by YVEC, earlier in the paragraph, it's identified as Yellowstone Valley Electric Cooperative, correct?
That's correct.
Could you now read the subsequent sentence, which then goes on to page 5?
Okay, YVEC smart meter opt out fee of $75 per meter is far above the average fee and may be the highest fee in the nation.
For clarity, does it say per meter per month?
Per meter per month. That's what it says.
You refer to the far above the average fee. What is the average fee?
I don't know.
On what basis are you concluding that 75 is above the average fee then?
Well, that's just my understanding.
So you cannot testify whether $15 is above or below the average fee?
I think it depends entirely on the utility and the circumstances. In this case, it was a farm located far out in the countryside, far from any other buildings. I think it all depends on the circumstances.
But you, in this sentence, are referring to the average fee within the nation, correct? Not at a specific location.
Yeah.
So is a $15 fee above or below the average fee? Can you tell that?
I really don't know.
Thank you. I have no additional. Oh, sorry. Without objection, I would like to admit this exhibit into the record.
Hearing no objection, the IPL hearing exhibit 219 is admitted. Mr. Schoechle?
I have just a couple of questions. And the questions relate to the exhibit that you were just discussing, IPL hearing exhibit 219. And I'm on page 2 in paragraph 3. And do you have concerns with the gathering of smart meter data from the perspective of the customer?
Yes, I do. In fact, I think I submitted an entire paper on that to this proceeding called Smart Meter Privacy.
And when you provided this affidavit in Montana, was that part of the testimony that you were providing there?
It was. That was a report that I did for the Department of Energy at the University of Colorado.
No additional questions.
Board Member Wagner. Board Member Lozier.
You testified about the use of fiber to carry the signals. Do you recall that?
That's right.
So a typical home may have fiber to the house now for internet and cable TV. Could that same fiber be used for this purpose?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
When you talk about on page 2, paragraph 2 of hearing exhibit 219, the security of the information, you talk about 1, 5, or 15-minute intervals. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is your opinion on the security or invasion of privacy issue if that information is collected once a month?
Well, I think that there are two issues. One is how often it's collected, and the other is what the interval is. What the data acquisition interval is, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 hour, whatever that is, because that reveals any of that data can be used to reveal a great deal about what is taking place in the premises. But obviously, the more frequently the data is gathered, the more granular, as they call it, the more it exposes the activities on the premises.
And you were present when there was testimony as it relates to how this data would be used, and that IPL has stated that it would not sell the data. Do you believe the data would be used in any other means?
I think that once the data is collected, you have absolutely no control. Even IPL may not have control over where the data goes. We've seen that with the Marriott Hotel last week. The data was collected for one purpose, and it ends up going places no one imagines. That's just the way it is now. I used to be the secretariat for 10 years for the International Standards Committee, ISO IEC Committee for Data Management and Interchange. So I had a lot of experience with what happens with data and how big data is managed.
Then am I correct to state that it's your position that any data that's collected is at risk, therefore it should not be collected at all?
The best way to protect data is to not collect it in the first place.
Mr. Marcus, do you have any redirect?
Yes, Mr. Schoechle, you were asked some questions about hacking, and there was a discussion about the meters being hacked into as compared to the endpoint. You mentioned that the smart meters are inexpensive, and as a result of that, I think you said that hacking is potentially more of a problem. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it difficult, easy to hack into a particular meter itself rather than the endpoint, but the meter on somebody's house or at somebody's office building?
Well, I won't say it's easy, but there's a lot of expertise around them. Any ham radio operator could figure out how to, that's really, there are a lot of those people are very committed and incredible nerds. They will figure out how to get into something like that if they really want to, just for enjoyment, and maybe for people can then therefore do it for nefarious purposes too. But it's possible. I'm saying I don't think I think the greater threat is the database itself. But I do think it's possible to hack a meter. Sure.
Do you know whether it's more difficult or easier to hack if you have a dedicated bandwidth that you've licensed as compared to using the streaming that's I'm not sure I'm expressing this correctly, but Census has said that its signal can go 10 miles because it has licensed a specific signal and there's a low signal to noise ratio. Is there any drawback from a hacking perspective if you have a dedicated frequency like that?
Well, it makes parts of the hacking easier. Maybe other parts are harder. But the part that is easier is that you can isolate the signal, the specific source, the specific meter. In a typical mesh network was used by a lot of other AMI systems. It's a kind of a nightmare because there's so much data traffic. But in this case, you could isolate it more easily.
Okay. And you were asked about page 17, line 19 of your rebuttal testimony, and the fact that Mr. Stetzer's and Ms. Matera's measurements in Dubuque at that one particular location have now been detracted because of the confusion of whether it was the electric meter or Black Hill's gas meter. Do you recall that testimony?
Just what I heard today. I had not previously, wasn't aware of that.
But since the date of your testimony was September 21st, you're familiar with the IPL testimony about, even in Wisconsin, how many times these meters can pulse. Did you learn that since your testimony in September 21st?
I was aware of that part, and I had a comment about that is that regardless of what the pulsing rate is, initially it can be changed anytime, and there's absolutely no assurance that it won't be changed the next day. I mean, it could be changed anytime. You could there is no assurance whatsoever that pulse rate will remain the same.
Okay. And do you know enough about meters to know that that's the case, that it's easy to change the pulsing of
these? Yeah, they're all programmable in that respect.
Do you know then how a meter would read and only transmit one times a week? Is that something that would have to be programmed, to your knowledge?
Those are parameters that are set in the meter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it has to be programmed that way.
Yeah, it's a setup, or many of them are able, you can dynamically change those parameters over the network.
I have no further questions.
Board Member Wagner?
Thank you. Mr. Schoechle, on that topic, so what you're saying is you do believe that the meters can be programmed to pulse or to read once a month?
Yeah, I think that's actually in earlier testimony, too.
And they can be programmed to turn off any alarms as well?
I don't know about what specifically. I don't know enough about this particular census meter, but it's my understanding that those are parameters that can be set in the meter.
Okay. With respect to data privacy, in your conversation with Board Chair Huser, you mentioned that the safest thing is not to have the data at all.
If you don't really need it, I think that the problem is the history of this whole smart meter business is about collecting data because it's easy, not because it's needed for any real purpose. And energy management is one of my specialties. The utility doesn't need all that data. It just sort of comes along for the ride once you create a remotely readable meter.
So for energy management, would you say that more information for the customer to manage their energy, it creates a better or worse system for energy management?
I think that what the customer needs, the future direction of this technology is for the controls. Right now, we're seeing a transition from utility-generated power to customer-generated power as it's an international trend with the distributed energy resources. And the utility industry is grappling with how to manage those resources because they're accustomed to centralized control systems. What we're going to see in the future is premises systems, controls that are based on premises in homes and buildings where the energy is generated, used, and stored, and not in the power grid. So the problem becomes balancing. And the Department of Energy's strategy in this direction, which I participate in the Gridwise Architecture Council, is to move toward what they call transactive energy, which is a concept a fairly new concept of real-time pricing of energy that is based on signals passed in real time like over fiber networks between premises and also between the premises and utilities. It's not a centralized control system anymore. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, it would be useful, but it has to be done in a secure and preserve privacy in the process.
And so whether or not that data exists on the utility side or the customer side, the data still exists and is still vulnerable.
In this case, it would be more dynamic data that's not stored. It's not like a database. It's an exchange of signals, of pricing, very transient pricing signals on the using the high-speed networks.
Okay. And in the current systems where utilities have customer information, is that system any inherently safer than any other system by which they are storing customer information?
It's not safer. I guess the biggest problem is that data isn't needed for any useful purpose, except that it may be useful for long-term utility planning purposes, but they can get that information already from their SCADA networks, and it's my opinion that the utilities would be better off, instead of deploying AMI systems, to deploy automated distribution systems. Automated distribution management is a far better investment for a utility today than AMI systems that create a lot of useless data.
Yeah, and I appreciate that answer. I think I should have been more specific in that the systems that utilities have today with a non-AMI, they are still collecting information that is stored and vulnerable. Is that correct?
Well, they're collecting billing data, just enough to bill the customers. But I think at this point there's no significant advantage in gathering the data automatically rather than using conventional analog meters and meter readers, because meter readers provide jobs for people that need some jobs, and the economic benefit of the AMI is either minuscule or actually negative.
So to go to a transactive energy environment, are there no increase in jobs needed in that case?
Well, you're still going to be billing, utilities are still going to be billing customers on a monthly basis. I think there's very few products in industrial history that have been ever as reliable as an old analog electric meter. I hate to say that, but it's true.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Marcus, do you have any redirect from that?
No.
Okay.
Your Honor,
No.
may I have leave for a very short recross?
You may proceed.
Mr. Schoechle, are you aware of any specific examples of hacking using a licensed specific bandwidth over radio frequency?
I'm not aware of a specific case.
Thank you. No other questions.
Mr. Marcus, did you want anything on that?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. You may call your next witness, Mr. Marcus.